Coming up, wait till you hear just how much the SEC has dominated the NFL draft, and we'll also tell you why it's about to happen again. It's all on the way next, right here on SEC Country Live. You know, we try to do a professional show, and part of that means like how you look on the air. Yeah. By the way, that's Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American. I'm Brandon Adams. I'm glad you're with us here for SEC Country Live today. We got SEC talk coming up, but I got to quickly explain here. The reason why I look so terrible today, and I don't look great any day, but I look extra bad today, it is pouring down rain in Atlanta, our home here for SEC Country Live, and I got drenched on my way back from lunch today. And you really can't do anything with this hair once it, kind of gets wet like that. Yeah. There's no blow dryer or anything like that. Plus, it'd just be out to here if I did. Yeah. So, never really looking like a matinee idol on the show. Today, maybe even a step in the wrong direction there, more so than usual.
Listen, I'm with you, man. I don't even know if I own an umbrella. So I'm sitting right there behind you and talking all things SEC football like we always do on the show, and a little bit of NFL draft today, right? I mean,
yeah.
We don't ever do the BA Q&A anymore. But
we used to a long time ago. Yeah. That was a previ's element that we used in the show back in the early days.
I am curious though, and you guys tell me in the comment section, how much do y'all really pay attention to the draft? Like, are all SEC fans really cued in on the draft, or is this kind of like a football thing where most SEC fans pay attention to just college football?
Yeah, we'll talk about that throughout the program. Let me start though the way we always do with our first and 10 here on SEC Country Live. And speaking of SEC domination in the NFL draft, I thought ESPN, the writer Edward Aschoff, had some really interesting stats that show you just how true that has been over the years, the last 5 years, the last 10 years. Let me give you an idea of just how thorough the SEC's control over this event has been. According to ESPN, they've led college football in total draft picks for 11 consecutive years. Had 270 draft picks in the last 5 years. That's the most by far. ACC second most during that span with 189. They've got the two programs that have the most draft picks over the last 5 years. That's Alabama and LSU. Each have had 65, by the way, in 5 years, which is amazing. They've got the program with the most running backs drafted, the most offensive linemen drafted, defensive backs drafted, and they have the program that's tied for the most in terms of tight ends drafted, and believe it or not, even kickers drafted. So it is pretty thorough, pretty dominant there for the SEC. And my guess is that's going to happen again tonight.
I don't think there's any doubt it's going to happen again tonight. And obviously, I pay attention to a lot of those Alabama guys. I would say there's probably 4 or 5 Alabama guys hoping to hear their name called in the first round of a draft. But yeah, you hit on it. Since I was in college and even back before that, I can remember just name after name. And I can remember the first time I knew a first-round draft pick. I was like, man, that's my boy. Like he gets drafted in the first round, that's my boy right there. And it's just really built up steam. And the NFL draft as a whole, really, right, has built up a ton of steam over the last 10 to 15 years. But the SEC just continues time after time to put the top of the talent back into the NFL, and I think it shows in the on-field gameplay. It shows on Sundays as well.
And if you're a college football fan, especially if you're a fan of the SEC, here's why this matters. You don't have to even watch these guys on Sunday to benefit from this. This becomes a real big commercial, an advertisement for just how great your program is, whether it's one of the programs that were just mentioned or one of the ones that's going to be dominant here tonight. In fact, Chase Goodbread, who knows a lot about the SEC and college football, works now for NFL.com. He says that when it comes to recruiting, the NFL draft is where it's at in terms of regenerating that roster. Here is Chase on that subject.
Today is as big a day for recruiting as the year in terms of being able to generate interest and respect from recruits. And the more of those type of guys you have, the easier it is to get more.
Yeah, and I think that's as well stated and succinct as you can make it there. The more of these draft picks you have, the more it makes it easier to get more. It becomes a bit of a revolving door here because tonight on TV, you're going to see a lot of Alabama names. You may see 3 Georgia names in the first round. You're going to see, potentially a South Carolina guy, an Arkansas guy, some LSU guys, maybe even one in the first round here. And that just opens the door for more. I believe that Kirby Smart's going to be at the draft tonight. Nick Saban was there last year. I'm assuming he'll be back there again, and that's a lot of TV publicity right there in Dallas for a lot of these SEC programs.
Yeah, it's a lot of advertising, and it's advertising you couldn't buy if you tried, right? I mean, there's no way that either one of these programs or any of the big programs in the SEC, you couldn't buy that kind of publicity for your team. Seeing those guys realizing their dreams, seeing those guys make a ton of money, seeing the coaches there giving them the hug, I mean, it's one of the best parts of SEC football. It also kind of, can be a kick in the lower area if one of your teams is not there, right? I mean,
Did you say a kick in the lower
area? I like backed myself into a corner, and I was like, how am I going to say? I backed myself into a corner. I was like, how am I going to get out of this? And the lower area is what I came out with. So, but I think it is funny.
A kick in the core muscles?
But yeah, kick the groin, the kick in the groin.
That's an inside joke from earlier this week.
I think it is funny though for the teams and the fans and the programs that don't have their coaches there. Kind of a realization of maybe where you're at as a program, right? I mean, I think somebody commented here just a minute ago, and James Ward said it's so frustrating when the Gators send a bunch of guys in the NFL and they become superstars.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what you get. I mean, you've seen that with Tennessee a little bit. You're seeing that a little bit with LSU. Definitely seeing that with like Alvin Kamara last year, and some of these. Arkansas is the same way. You don't always get the wins on the field that you have superstars coming out.
All right, let me get a few comments here in terms of what people be watching. Troy Harper says, I always watch the first round. Rick Keene says, I watch the first round, then nothing. Michael Morrow says, I watch the first round of the NFL draft every year. Jake Kirk says, my wife and I make it an event. Oh, we love it. Trey Duke says, people don't care about the draft. They'd rather watch SpongeBob. I don't know about that. Michael Morrow says, I should be wearing a hat right now with my wet hair. Maybe one of these days I will do that. Today it'll be a good day to do it. You see the sideline gals do that from time to time. And then there's a rainy ESPN game or something like that. They sort of tuck that hair into a ponytail and put a hat over it. Maybe I should do something like that.
I thought about just coming in here and going T-shirt and backwards hat just to see what you'd do. Just to throw things, throw a complete wrench in everything we try to do around here. I mean,
honestly, I'd actually like to sort of set the standard where we start wearing hats more often.
Yeah.
Maybe slowly, but we're already casual shorts enough as it is.
You guys can't see my jeans. Maybe wear some shorts.
Yeah, maybe this summer we can sort of work our way down to wearing shorts, things like that. So maybe that's the case. Bo Molinari, by the way, on Facebook says, it's strange, but I love college football, but the NFL for me is just about my team and my fantasy league. And I'm kind of the same way. I've mentioned this before. I think because I do spend so much energy on college football Saturdays with a favorite team and just a sport in general that I both love to watch but also love to cover. By the time Sunday rolls around, I just don't have a lot of energy left.
Yeah, no, I see that. And you know what's crazy for me too is because, I've been in those shoes before. I was a draft pick. I've been on the sidelines, been in those huddles, been a part of the team. Every year that goes by, though, that I'm not part of that, it's like, I probably watched 2 Falcons games last year.
Is that right?
It just, I don't know. It's kind of like pulling back the curtain, It's like the Wizard of Oz saying, don't look behind the curtain. Like, sometimes you just shouldn't look behind the curtain because I just can't fall back in love with the NFL that I once was.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, I introduce you. People make fun of me for the things that I say each and every day. I virtually say the same stuff all the time. I always call you the former Alabama All-American. I could just as easily say, hey, former NFL star, you played, half a decade in the NFL? I mean, I could just as easily say that, but there is something about, your status as an NFL, I should say an SEC player, having played, won a national championship at Alabama, that's always seemed way more significant to me than even an NFL career. You played for a long time in the league.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that, too. I mean, being from the Southeast and, spending 5 years in college in the Southeast and spending 5 years in the NFL in the Southeast, people open their eyes a lot wider when you say he's played for Alabama sometimes than they do when you say he's played for the Falcons.
Josh Rowan on Facebook says, I wouldn't want to wear a hat on the show. He says, I wouldn't want to cover up that hard part that I have going on. Listen, y'all make fun of my hair. This is just the way my hair grows. Like, there's nothing else I can do about this. This is just this is how it grows.
Listen, man, you got to choose your battles. You cover up the hard part. I'm going to cover up my bald spot here not too long. It's going in
listen, this is what you got to do. All right, we'll get some comments on YouTube and Twitter coming up in a moment. Let me do item number 2 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I thought this was interesting from Chris Lowe at ESPN.com, talking about what one anonymous coach is saying about Jalen Hurts. And if the anonymous coach, and by the way, this is apparently a head coach in college football. There's no specific criteria if it's an SEC coach or not, but we love anonymous coach quotes on this show. And this anonymous coach kind of swimming upstream a bit in terms of the Jalen Hurts opinion here. We said yesterday, at least I did, that I think the writing's on the wall here, that Hurts is on his way out of Alabama now. I think the latest comments from Nick Saban make that true. But this coach apparently thinks that if Hurts sticks around, you know what? He may actually have a chance to win this job. What he told Chris Lowe of ESPN is, you've got to have guys who can move back there in today's game. Now, I know Tagovailoa can, but not like Jalen Hurts. Hurts is like a running back there, but he also sees the field and has a great arm. And when you have Alabama's talent around him, he's even more dangerous. It's going to be hard to keep them both, but it's a problem a lot of us would like to have. So I got to be very honest. I'm obviously in the NFL draft mindset right now where there's so much like whisper campaigns and rumors. Right. Some of this stuff seems designed to sort of like deflate people's draft, players' draft value. When I think about that in terms of this quote, I think about one of two things. Is this anonymous coach, Nick Saban, Or did he put an anonymous coach up to sort of make, plant a seed that Jalen Hurts is actually better than Tua Tagovailoa? Or is this something else? I mean, is there some sort of method to the madness of what is pretty clearly kind of a contrarian opinion from this anonymous head coach?
Well, I don't know if it's so much contrarian. I think he's speaking a lot of truth here. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to get on here and be like, Jalen Hurts stinks. I mean, now, let me take that back. There's a ton of you guys in the comment section that would say Jalen Hurts stinks. That's just not me. Jalen Hurts is a very good quarterback, in my opinion. The thing you have to do is look at it and compare him next to Tua Tagovailoa, who I think the ceiling is through the roof. And that's where I kind of get the vibe that Jalen Hurts is second tier. Jalen Hurts without Tua Tagovailoa, guess what? Jalen Hurts is starting next year. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Jalen Hurts is starting for 2 more seasons without Tua on the sideline. So you would get 4-year starter Jalen Hurts. You would get Alabama record holder Jalen Hurts. You would get, maybe a 1 or 2-time national champion Jalen Hurts. But Tua's there. And so I think this guy, you kind of have to take everything he says with a grain of salt. Yes, he's a good quarterback. Yes, he has a good arm. Yes, he's a dynamic runner. But Tua has a lot of upside as well, and that's where we kind of come down on all this talking point and decision-making kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the anonymous head coach says he's like a running back there. In this particular case, that's not necessarily a compliment to Jalen Hurts. And I told you this. I saw him on the field in the national championship game. I was watching him up close and personal. He's the most dynamic running quarterback I've ever seen in person. Yeah. I mean, even compared to Tim Tebow. Watching Hurts with the ball in his arm running, as a college running quarterback, I think he's visually more dynamic than even Tim Tebow appeared to be. I'm not telling you he's a better running quarterback than Tebow. That's a different kind of conversation. But watching him run, there's a huge wow factor there. But in this particular case, that's not necessarily one. You want a little bit less wow and a little more know-how.
Yeah, no, and I think that's such an interesting talking point, too, when you talk about how dynamic he is as a runner, because people look at it and say, well, does he have a 4.3 speed? Can he shake somebody in the shoes? That's not always what it is. It's about Jalen Hurts' vision, his ability to take off and know where to run and who to run behind and where to catch his blocks. That's what he's really good at, and that's what I don't think a lot of people can quantify that. So sometimes you don't understand exactly how good he is as a running quarterback in that offense, and it's exceptionally good.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a lot of comments coming in here on YouTube. Cliff Nelson says Jalen Hurts would be a beast in Gus Malzahn's offense. I wish Jalen Hurts could transfer there. Yeah, I mean, that is the kind of offense where seemingly he would, I think, work pretty well. Now, he's not going to end up at Auburn. He'd have to go the JUCO route to end there. But the way that Lane Kiffin used those jet sweeps to help him, that's what Auburn does as part of their basic offense attack. They do a lot of the option stuff. They do, some of that kind of stuff. Hurts in that Auburn offense would be pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if dynamic's the word. I don't know that I don't know that in Jalen Hurts' future you're ever going to get as much out of him as you did 2 years ago in Lane Kiffin's offense. I think they were perfect for each other. I think they meshed very well. But I do think, I look at, kind of what Sean White was, I guess, a couple of seasons ago for Auburn, the quarterback position, where, he's got a couple 100-yard rushing games. He's passing the ball, but really they're a dynamic running team. It does kind of open your eyes and wonder if there's another SEC system that Jalen Hurts would fit into better than the one at Alabama. I don't know that he's ever going to get anything better than Lane Kiffin, but I do look around and see some systems that might fit him better.
Teresa Stewart says he needs to do what he's good at, being good at more than one position. I would think that would be a good thing there. And that is that tough choice, to go back to what Hurts' dad said. We quoted it a week ago here on SEC Country Live, that he's a quarterback. He wants to play quarterback. Listen, I love what the recruiting analysts say sometimes to the high school players. You see them put this out there on Twitter. Play what position you want to play, but if somebody tells you the same thing over and over again, we think you're a defensive back instead of a quarterback, we think you're a linebacker instead of a running back, at some point in time, maybe you got to consider that. I mean, should Jalen Hurts consider playing a different position when so many people outside of his own bubble here are saying that's what he should do?
I don't know. I think it's all about what he wants because, listen, how many college programs out there tried to recruit Lamar Jackson as a defensive back, right? There were people out there telling him, listen, you're not a quarterback, you're a safety. Guess what? You won the Heisman Trophy as a quarterback. I think you have to find the right system. Now, I think there's some limits on what Jalen Hurts is, and maybe he'll come to that realization at some point. But it's like I've said, this guy's only been in college 2 years, right? There's still room to grow for Jalen. So I'm not ready to just destroy his dreams just yet and say he's not going to be a quarterback ever in his life and he's not going to improve his accuracy.
We'll hear from Nick Saban on this subject in a moment. Jamie Blanton on Facebook says, do you think it's too much to think Saban may treat these guys like baseball pitchers and put the best quarterback against the vulnerable competition? If he could keep Jalen Hurts, I think that's what he would do. And I think you and I both agree with that we look at the Alabama schedule all the time. not until November do you even have to worry about which quarterback you could play. You could play Mac Jones for September and October and beat everybody on the schedule. It's in November that you got to have your guy figured out by, because that's when you play LSU, that's when you play Auburn, that's when the real tough games, or at least the toughest games for Alabama actually begin. The problem is Saban's not going to have that luxury, and I don't think that he can publicly put a lot of pressure on Hurts to stay, because that's just going to end up being negative recruiting fodder for the next generation of dual threat quarterbacks. So that's what. This is a 10-year story for Nick Saban. This is, assuming he wants to stick around for Alabama for a while, he wants more quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts, and how you treat this Hurts is impactful of how you get the next one.
No, yeah, I completely agree. And this, I think that what you just spelled out is perfect in terms of what Nick Saban wishes would happen, right? You would wish that Jalen Hurts would get on the field, but it's like I said yesterday. At some point, and I was talking about the Georgia quarterback competition, but it's the same thing for Bama. At some point, when you're driving down the field and it's a tie game, or you're down by 7 at the end of the half or end of the game, you're going to have to put the guy in there that you really want to rely on. It's hard. It's easy to say this guy gets this reps, and they're both going to get 30 snaps, and this guy's going to throw this much, this guy's going to run this much. When it comes down to the nitty-gritty and the crunch time, you have to make a decision on which one of those guys is going to be taking the snap, and I think that's where you have to start making a decision. I said this early in the week. This is not about September and October. This is about the end of November. This is about December, and this is about early January for Jalen Hurts.
Michael Clyburn, by the way, in the comment section says LSU told Dak Prescott he'd be a tight end, not a quarterback, and there are a lot of examples of evaluations like that that have gone wrong. Mac Brown at Texas, maybe most famous of all. He told Johnny Manziel, RG3, like this whole long list of good quarterbacks. Cliff Kingsbury, too, I think, that they should play other positions. They all went on to great careers. So you have some negative examples of a bad evaluation. But listen, when a bunch of people tell you the same thing, they can't all be wrong.
Well, that's why I think you have to pick your poison here. How long are you going to give Jalen Hurts? How long is Jalen Hurts going to give himself? Is he going to say, boy, you know what, if after 4 years of college or after 5 years of college, if he chooses to transfer, if after that time I'm not a good quarterback, then maybe you look at a position change. But I don't think he's ready to pull that trigger just yet.
Here is what Nick Saban told the SEC Network about what Jalen Hurts needs to do if he does want to stay at quarterback and be a better player. Here is Saban's evaluation of where to go next.
We keep working with Jalen because he's such a great athlete and he can make plays in so many ways to sort of be more consistent as a pocket passer. I don't think the play action and the move in the pocket stuff is an issue at all for him. And he does a great job of taking care of the ball. He's got a lot of confidence in making the right choices and decisions.
So that is the evaluation there from Nick Saban about Jalen Hurts and kind of where things go next. And speaking of where things go next in terms of not just his development as a player, but where he ends up, I cannot wait to see all that unfold. Let's do item number 3 in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And some interesting stuff coming out of Tennessee. And you and I both kind of had our turn sort of trying to guess how Philip Fulmer would respond to what Jeremy Pruitt said on Saturday after the Tennessee spring game, when Pruitt, at least publicly, wasn't too happy with the performance of the fans, not as many people inside Neyland Stadium, and maybe even paying close enough attention for Pruitt's taste. If you've forgotten, here is Pruitt calling out his own fans for what they did on Saturday.
I thought the ball log was spectacular. I don't know how many fans we had. I think what was it? You guys probably know. Anybody know the number?
Yeah,
65,000. Well, to me, it's kind of like our football team for the fans. The ones that were here, I'm proud they were here. They're fired up. They're ready to get going. Okay, and then there were some people that wasn't here that had legitimate reasons they couldn't be here. All right, and then there were some people that wasn't here that, why wasn't they here? It's kind of like our football team. So I think we all need to look in the mirror and see who we want to be.
That's not the kind of thing you hear from all SEC coaches after every spring game. That's quite a volatile statement, and we all kind of wondered, the old school, old guard guy like Philip Fulmer, the athletic director, how's he going to feel about that? Well, 24/7 Sports caught up with Fulmer on this subject, and Fulmer gives a defense of Jeremy Pruitt here. Let me read you what Fulmer had to say. He says, I liked his approach on not having the big fan day because he's trying to practice a game day. That to him is important. It's a game day for the kids to practice the West Virginia game and East Tennessee State game and all the way through. So he's looking at it from that standpoint. That's Philip Fulmer via 24/7 Sports. I might argue that's a pretty good dress rehearsal for the East Tennessee State game. That's probably about the same crowd that you'll see there. Are you a little bit surprised to hear the public support from Fulmer in the direction of Jeremy Pruitt on this?
I think I'm a little bit surprised because, Fulmer does have that kind of old school feel to him, but I got to give him, kudos. I got to give him due props here because I wondered if he would be able to fall in that lane and fall behind Jeremy Pruitt in some of these instances when times like this came up. I mean, this is exactly what we wondered about, right, when Jeremy Pruitt was given that job. Boy, when Jeremy Pruitt speaks his mind and does things the way he wants Jeremy Pruitt to do them, what's Philip Fulmer going to do?
Yeah.
And in this first instance, he really has come out and kind of backed the way Jeremy Pruitt feels in some of these, different circumstances. And I got to give the guy credit in that area.
Glenn Coleman says that Pruitt sent a strong message with his comments. Here's the only thing I'm going to nitpick Fulmer over, at least in terms of if I'm Fulmer's boss here or if I'm a typical athletic director. I think that Fulmer missed a chance to sort of clarify the PR message here a little bit. If I'm Philip Fulmer and you ask me, hey, what do you think about what Jeremy Pruitt said about the fans? What you want to do right there for like the best possible PR is to say, oh, what I heard was Jeremy Pruitt incredibly complimentary of Tennessee fans for those that came, made the ball walk a great atmosphere. I think you also heard just how high Jeremy Pruitt's standards are. If he wants all pistons firing for Tennessee in the same direction at maximum capacity, there was this sort of opportunity for sort of better PR. Fulmer, who's not trained in that regard, who's a football coach who spent his whole life avoiding the media as opposed to what good athletic directors do, which is use the media, he's just not going to be good at that part of it. That's why ex-football coach in sort of the retirement phase of a career, that's not the best option as a athletic director.
Yeah, I think when I look at it, I just look about how it could have gone. I think that there's always better ways for it to be handled. I think that Philip Fulmer could have stepped up and said, he expects a lot of the fans. I do too. He could have really backed it. But I think that Philip Fulmer dodged this in the right way. And I think that's why I want to give the guy credit here and today because we have asked questions about that exact scenario. Now, whether or not that can be sustained, I think is a different topic because if Jeremy Pruitt continues to go back to the well in that direction and then next year you have 10,000 less or 20,000 less, then I think it's going to become an issue.
On Facebook, Rick Keene also says that what Fulmer says privately and what he says publicly could be due to very different things, and that's certainly true. I mean, yes. I am going to stand by my original opinion that Fulmer, the old school guy, probably didn't love what Pruitt said, even if his public remarks were different than that. But just because Pruitt thinks one thing and Fulmer thinks the other doesn't mean the AD is necessarily right. I mean, listen, we've seen plenty of Tennessee fans who've kind of lined up behind Jeremy Pruitt over what he said here. I'm not so sure that the old school guy is necessarily the right perspective here, but it is fair to point out that what he thinks privately could be very different.
No, I completely agree with that. And it just has to be a working relationship, right? Like, they don't have to agree on everything. They don't have to agree on how to run a football team. I think that's where they have to be able to come together and find that kind of dynamic that works between them. I mean, you and I have a working relationship. Off the air, I don't really care for you much. And so we... So, you just try to find a way to work things out amongst each other, and I think they're doing that.
But here's where things kind of get interesting. There's a really good conversation the other day on the Tennessee podcast for SEC Country. We do a great Vols show with Josh Ward, a guy in Knoxville, Mike Griffith, our Tennessee reporter. They kind of do it together. And the subject kind of comes up now of, hey, Vols fans may have missed their chance to impress Jeremy Pruitt at the spring game in terms of filling the place to the tune of $100,000, but they can ante up some money here to support some of the ongoing projects, coaches' salaries, new weight rooms, stuff like that. And the question's asked of, will Tennessee fans do that? Here is Josh Ward on that subject.
It is kind of funny, those comments that have been talked about over and over and over again from Saturday by Jeremy Pruitt when he talked about the fans and he was talking about everybody at Tennessee. He did say, what do we want to be here? You got to kind of look in the mirror. You want to be a winner. You want to be a champion. You got to pay for championships almost.
Listen, I love Josh Ward. I love Mike Griffith. I think this is a fascinating conversation. I guess I do find myself wanting to defend fans here. Even if I'm not a Tennessee fan, I want to stick up for the Vol fan on this and say, you're really backing me to a corner. Let's say I'm wearing an orange and white sweatshirt today instead of a red and black one. If you're going to say, hey, you want a winner? Show up with your pocketbook first or your wallet first, and then we'll see about doing it. If I'm a Tennessee fan, my thought here is, how about you win some of these recruiting battles? How about you beat out Auburn for Wanye Morris? How about you hold on to a Quay Walker, from the 2018 class? How about you do some of that kind of stuff, and then we'll see about giving you some of my money. But this idea of you got to spend your money first, and then we'll see about putting a winner on the field, that's not how other realms of business work.
I think that, and I'm surprised you kind of go that way because I feel like we think of it backwards, right? I think in order to win those recruiting battles, you got to have the money, you got to have the facilities, you've got to have the stands packed full, right? I mean, I feel like that's what they're trying to work towards. I feel like that's the reason Jeremy Pruitt wants it to be packed out, and I feel like that's what a lot of fans are missing. And it's like I said earlier this week, Jeremy Pruitt watched that first A-Day when Nick Saban showed up at Alabama. Jeremy Pruitt's buddy Kirby Smart rolled over to Georgia, and he watched that first G-Day at Georgia, so he understands what these things look like and what it takes to get these program rolling, and he didn't feel like that Tennessee had that going on.
And see, I actually don't feel the way you just described, that it takes facilities to get recruits. I try to say this as much as I can. Relationships are what win recruits. Right. You know, trust, honesty, you know, authenticity to the relationship. That's what wins with recruits. And then after that, we can start building you a weight room. We can start building you, a new practice facility. We can do all that kind of stuff. But can you leverage your relationships? And, you know, there's some evidence out there that Jeremy Pruitt can get you close to that. He can get you the silver medal, but maybe just couldn't quite close the deal. When you start closing that deal, if I'm a Tennessee booster, if I'm a season ticket holder, that's when I want to get more on board in terms of spending money. But you got to give me a reason to. It's like, you know, you can't say, hey, I'm going to open up a pizza restaurant, but you got to promise me you'll come, and you got to promise me you're going to buy a large pizza every Friday night. You can't do that. You got to build the restaurant and then hope people come. You know, the coach, the athletic association, they've got to lead first on something like that.
Yeah, and I think there's also the dynamic between Pruitt and the recruits for that too, right? I mean, we talked about Kirby Smart. This is the whole talking point last year. Kirby Smart's recruiting class was really building towards something special. But what did I say? He's got to be able to win on the field. He's got to be able to make sure these games that are coming up, he can win these games. Because if he's selling them on being the next great program, that's what they've got to start to be. And I think he did that. I think that's why so many recruits were able to hop on and say, listen, he was not lying in terms of the development he's getting. Look how these guys are playing. Look how many guys are going to the NFL draft. Look how many games they've won. And then it starts to steamroll. So I think he's got to develop that trust with them as well.
Cliff Nelson on YouTube says it's relationships that seal the deal, but it's the eye candy of the facilities that get the first interest. That's a pretty good point by Cliff. Let me let you hear, though, from Mike Griffith, who covers Tennessee for us here for SEC Country, on a little bit more on this subject about all the things that Tennessee fans may be on the hook to pay for here.
You're going to have to pay more in donations. You're going to pay more in ticket prices because somebody's got to pay these salaries. This money just doesn't come out of thin air. I mean, Coach Fulmer just signed a 4-year deal worth $1 million a year, and you're still settling out with John Curry. So the money's got to come from somewhere. It's simple economics here. Tennessee fans are hungry, and they want to win. So I think they'll support Coach Fulmer and Coach Pruitt. He's pretty much committed to sparing no expense. He's going to do whatever the head coach wants to get the program back where everybody believes and knows and feels it should be.
So, listen, I love Mike Griffith to death, but that's a tough thing to lay at the feet of Tennessee fans of, hey, we screwed up with John Curry, now y'all got to pay for it. And, oh, yeah, by the way, the guy we hired to replace him, we gave him a 4-year deal to the tune of $1 million each. You got to pay for that, too. Tennessee fans have been through a lot. And, listen, this is the one thing that I hope that people can't appreciate about this show. You went to Alabama. I'm a huge Georgia guy. But on this, I find myself on the Tennessee fan side of, be careful about how much you ask me to spend after what you've dragged me through over the last decade here. Be really careful by what you're asking for from me, because you know what? Just by paying attention, I'm giving you a lot right now.
No, yeah, I completely agree. And listen, I have a ton of friends that are Tennessee fans, and they will tell you straight up that it's been a tough, 10 years, and a lot of different ways, going all the way back to Lane Kiffin, the end of the Philip Fulmer era. And so there is that, hey, when can we expect this turnaround? It feels like now you're on your 4th regime after Philip Fulmer, and it seems like every time a coach takes the stage, it's like, this is what we've got to do. This is what we've got to do. And people, show up, they empty out their pocketbooks, the stadium gets renovated, there's a new facility. When do those wins start to come? And I think the Tennessee fans, the ones I know at least, they need something. They need kind of a show faith type thing going on in their face when they're going to dive back in.
Thought this was interesting from Sports Illustrated about the Florida Gators. Let's do that right now. It's the subject of item number 4 on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. Joan Neeson is the writer, and she was looking at the list of players around all of college football that helped themselves during spring practice. There were a few SEC names that made the list. Most of those are guys that we've talked about in some form or fashion over the last few days here on our show. One name, though, that Joan mentioned that we have not brought up, but if you're a Florida fan, you need to hear a whole lot more about on shows like this if you're going to have the kind of season that Gators fans want, is Antonius Clayton, the former Uber prospect, big-time pass rusher. Well, Joan says that Clayton really helped himself during this spring practice. Here's what she writes for SI.com, that Clayton was the top-rated recruit in Florida's class, number 27 player in the country according to 24/7 Sports Composite, but he's barely played in his first 2 seasons in Gainesville, logging just 10 tackles so far. If spring practice is an indication, that's about to change. 6'2", 254-pound, weak-side defensive end, started spring ball, getting the most of his reps with the number 3 defense. But he rose through the ranks, managed back-to-back sacks in Florida's spring game. The new coaching staff might just be the spark Clayton needs to become a factor. Now, I won't pretend to be an expert on this in terms of I didn't really see him during the spring game. I don't really know how you really judge spring game sacks because those are judgment calls by the refs here, although based on the way they were letting Felipe Franks run around, if they whistled him for a sack, he must have really gotten one. But I do know this. Antonius Clayton is a guy that Florida really needs. You got to use the talent that you have, find someone to get use out of them. Clayton was a big-time prospect. If he's on his way to growing into something for Todd Grantham here, that is really good news for Florida.
Yeah, and there's a path for him, right? I mean, there's a path for him. When you look at the C.C. Jefferson injury and look at the fact that he's going to be coming back from that injury, and they don't play exactly the same position, but we're talking about pass rushers. Look at the fact that he's going to be coming back right there before fall camp. Guess what? A guy like Antonius Clayton, Jashai Polite, Jabari Zuniga, a lot of these edge rushers for them, they're going to have to take center stage on this pass rush throughout the summer, throughout some of these workouts. So the path is clear for him, and Florida needs Clayton to step up in a big way. And I've talked to a ton of Florida fans that say this guy, first guy off the bus, right? I mean, he's the first kid. All the measurables are there. So in order for him to turn the corner, maybe it did take a little bit more of that development. Maybe it takes a little bit of Nick Savage. Maybe it takes a different defensive approach. I look at a Gators defense that, in my opinion, is loaded at a bunch of positions just on that top tier. They've got to find one of these guys like Antonius Clayton that really can turn the corner and start to rush the passer.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes. By the way, let me also mention one more thing, too, while we're talking about Florida here. I have certainly been hard on Florida for what it's not done in recruiting. Florida does pick up a commitment in the last 24 hours. Tyron Hopper's a 4-star linebacker. He's from the Atlanta area. This is an example also of what Dan Mullen needs more of. And this is one of those deals where, weirdly, I've actually received some support from Florida fans for what I've said here, because my point about Florida has always been that in the golden age of Florida football, the Steve Spurrier era, the Urban Meyer era, even the Will Muschamp era, which is not the golden era, but the point I'm making here, it was elite recruits, one right after the other. No one was out recruiting Florida really in any given year. If you want to explain why Florida's dipped below that, it's the lack of those elite recruits. Too many 3-star names connected in Florida to Florida in the Jim McElwain era and really even the start of the Dan Mullen era. But get a 4-star linebacker, that's a big deal. This is like a top 250 player in the country. I think he's in the top 247 from 24/7 Sports. That's a pretty good addition for Florida there.
No, I completely agree, and I think it tells the whole story, because this is something that has to continue to happen, right? This can't be a one-time guy, and I'm all on board with giving Dan Mullen credit. I think that you have to take that first step in order to start the journey. I think that Dan Mullen's starting to do that, but I got to tell you, it was a little bit sobering for me as a guy who feels really good about Dan Mullen at Florida that when they did land the recruit, I go back to look at the recruiting class, number 8 in the SEC, number 15 nationally. I thought that would have jumped them up a little bit farther, but they've got to continue to get guys like this. Now, they're getting a lot of looks. I mean, there's a lot of whispers about who's going to go to Florida and who's not and who's looking that way, and they're starting to get people on campus. They've got to continue to land kids like this out of places like Roswell, Georgia, if they're going to continue down that path.
Robert Anderson on Facebook Live says, go Gators. This is the year of defensive ends for Florida. We have the most talented defensive ends in the SEC this year. You've also been pretty high on that Florida defensive depth up front for that defensive line. Based on what you've said in the past, you kind of agree with Robert a little bit, right? I don't know if it's the most, but you like the group.
I think that they might have the most talented group of edge rushers. Let me put it that way. Now, if we're talking about output, I think Antonius Clayton is a perfect example of what you have and what you should have. You know what I mean? Like, Antonius Clayton should be one of those guys. C.C. Jefferson should be one of those guys. Jabari Zuniga, Clayton. They're 3 deep on both sides. They should all be elite edge rushers when you look at how athletic they are and look at their talent, look at their body composition. But most of those guys, for me, have not yet turned the corner. That's why I've been so high on what I think Nick Savage can do with these guys. Get that little bit of extra speed, be able to dig down a little bit further. And I think you've heard Sal Sinceri say this down in Florida, that he wants to be 4 deep. Like, you know what? You might run a 4.7. Sal Sinceri said this a couple weeks ago. You might run a 4.7, but after 60 plays, you don't run a 4.7. So he wants to keep those guys rotating in, and I think they're going to have the ability to do that this year.
By the way, quick late breaking news here. Broderick Jones, 6'6", 300-pound offensive tackle, one of the top 10 tackles in the country. He's from Lithonia, Georgia. He commits to Georgia here. So Georgia does not get any commitments coming initially off of G-Day, but Jones coming in here this week. So Georgia needs tackles, true tackles. Got plenty of guards, needs some true offensive tackles. It sounds like Broderick Jones going to be that guy for UGA, as he's the this is a 2020 offensive tackle, by the way, for the class of 2020 here. So Georgia answering its tackle need there for the class of 2020. Let's keep the recruiting talk going here for a moment and do item number 5 on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. And some of this stuff is going to be about Alabama, but for me, this is a topic that's really about LSU, because I thought that one of the most significant recruiting moments of this past weekend was Alabama getting Ishmael Sopsher, the elite defensive tackle from Amite, Louisiana, on campus for the A-Day game on Saturday. Here is what Sopsher told SEC Country's Chris Kirshner about his relationship with Alabama right now. He says, talking with Coach Cool, he means the brand new defensive line coach, Craig Kulagowski. I mean, his name speaks for itself. He's really a cool guy. You can tell that he's an intelligent, humble guy, and he really cares about his players. He's going to battle for his players on and off the field and will 100% make sure they're in the right place. And with Tosh Lapoy, interesting that he calls him Tosh, but he calls. I've been knowing him for a while now. I really like those guys. That's Ishmael Sopsher to SEC Country. Sopsher also recently tweeted some love for Alabama, hashtag Roll Tide with the A and the Alabama colors there. This is a guy, once again, right there in LSU's backyard. I forget the name of the parish. It's a hard thing to pronounce, but that's a parish.
The city's Amite, right? I think it's
it's Amite High School, Amite, Louisiana, but the parish in general, which is sort of the Louisiana version of counties. There have been a bunch of guys in that area that have gone to Alabama recently. If you are LSU, you cannot lose the nation's, number 2 defensive tackle out of your own state to Alabama. This is a must. From my perspective, Mike, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, this is a must-win recruiting battle for LSU.
I don't think there's anybody, and our LSU fans in the YouTube comment section are echoing the same thing right now. I mean, even Cliff Nelson saying this is a must-get for Orgeron in this upcoming class. And in a lot of ways, this is what this is what I at least have been talking about in terms of Ed Orgeron so much, that it's not so much the wins and losses on the field in the upcoming season, as he has to hold up the standard that has been LSU recruiting for so long now, right? You cannot let that down. Going all the way back to, Nick Saban, going all the way through Les Miles' tenure, even these last couple of years, they've been hauling in these recruits. They've put the wall up around Louisiana for the most part. Now Alabama stole a couple of guys, a couple of guys get out to Texas, takes it in, whatever. This is a guy you can't lose. I mean, this is a guy in your backyard that is you say elite. I mean, we talk about 5 stars.
Yeah.
To me, there's a difference between those elite 5 stars and a guys that are, 5-star quarterback, this and that. This guy is game-changing type of talent. I mean, I'm going to put him right there next to Owen Popo, who's going to make his announcement on Tuesday in terms of recruits that they're going to be a big deal wherever they land, right? And this is just one of those guys, and can't say it enough, LSU, you can't miss on this guy. And I think there's a lot of interesting comments from him in this story from Chris Kirshner.
Yeah.
I think Kirshner did a great job. He did mention, which I thought was interesting, I'm surprised you didn't bring up, that he didn't really have a lot of love for Jeremy Pruitt.
Yeah, I didn't know if we wanted to go down that road today or not, but I will admit, I thought that's kind of interesting that he had no connection with Alabama at all when Jeremy Pruitt was defensive coordinator. But the moment Pruitt went to Tennessee, he starts giving Alabama time again. Yeah. I don't quite know what to make about that, but this guy, now he did not go into detail with Kirshner about why, but this guy, elite defensive tackle, did not like Jeremy Pruitt.
Yeah, he didn't go into detail, but he said, listen, I'm not going to go down that road, but, Jeremy Pruitt wasn't really my guy. And so afterwards, he starts showing some love to Alabama. He shows up at the A-Day game last week, which is a big deal because he has gone out and said in this article, proximity to his family or staying close to home has nothing to do with anything. Now, he didn't name any favorites. I think he does have a top 5. I don't even think Alabama was included in that top 5.
Originally not,
Originally. Yeah. And so I think that you look at it and he says, listen, my recruit's wide open. I am wide open. He's not going to decide till February, so a lot of time for LSU to make that ground up. But, man, the last thing you want is for a guy like this in your backyard that's going out of his way to head up to Tuscaloosa over the weekend.
Mark Tepner on Facebook says the guy is huge, Roll Tide. Danny McClain, who, by the way, we have not heard from Danny in a while, have we?
Danny, where you
Danny is always one of our great Facebook commenters. It seems like we've missed Danny here a little bit lately. He says if he wants a national championship ring, he's going to come to Alabama. And, listen, I mean, facts are facts. For LSU right now, that is the tough situation is that, Alabama can claim that. Who was the recruit?
Patrick Surtain Jr.
Yeah, was that the one that Saban said, if you go to LSU, we're just going to beat you for 4 years?
Oh, no, that wasn't.
Who was that?
That might have been Landon Collins, maybe.
I forget who it was. The problem is like these two teams do play each other every year. A couple of years ago, it seemed like they're on equal footing. Alabama has put some distance between themselves and LSU, and That makes it tough in recruiting. Right now, Alabama's got some hardware that LSU can't point to.
No, I think that's what I thought that's what you're alluding to. Patrick Surtain Jr. this last year on signing day says, I wanted to go somewhere where I can win a championship.
Yeah,
and that
that's
was
a good point.
A big deal for a lot of Alabama fans and a lot of LSU fans, because that tells you in my mind how slippery that slope is for LSU. I think once you dip below that certain standard that you set for yourself, it's extremely hard to climb back up that hill. And I think that's what I've been saying for LSU fans. You have to be careful about how comfortable you are with Ed Orgeron at the helm of that program. You cannot slip below that level where people start questioning whether or not you can get back to the top.
Let's do item number 6 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I thought the Clemson Insider, who is a site that covers Clemson, we don't talk Clemson here on this show because they're an ACC school, but Dabo Swinney at an event the other night had kind of an interesting quote. I'm assuming this was in relationship to a question he was asked. I guess he's near Georgia. That's why a question like this gets asked of, hey, would you like to see Clemson and Georgia play a little bit more? These two teams did play in 2013, 2014, and when I was growing up in the 80s, this was a great rivalry. Two teams that played every year as non-conference foes. Dabo to the Clemson Insider says, oh yeah, absolutely. It'd be great for both fan bases. I've said we should play Georgia for a long time. We're going to play somebody like that every year. We're going to Texas A&M this year. Then they come back to us. We've played Auburn a bunch of times, so I think that would be great. I'm sure they're going to play somebody big every year. I don't know who they play this year, but I'm sure they have somebody out of their conference. To me, it would be great for the fan bases. Now, as a Georgia fan, which I am, I would love to see this rivalry with Clemson renewed, playing more often. I've even said, if it was up to me, I'd replace Georgia Tech with Clemson.
Right.
Stop playing Georgia Tech. You get nothing out of that. There's nothing to be gained from that. Clemson, who you're battling with on a regular basis in the recruiting trail, you might as well battle them on the field too. Give me Georgia Clemson every year. You can get rid of Georgia Tech. I mean, there are a lot of rivalries that used to be played that aren't played anymore. This is a rivalry because of everything that's at stake right now between these two teams. This is just a game for me that's begging to be played.
Yeah, and you mentioned the proximity, and I do remember when you first said that. You got a lot of attention around the Atlanta area from some of those Georgia Tech fans about saying that you wish you could replace it with Clemson. And listen, Dabo Swinney is one of those guys though talking about this that is willing to put his money where his mouth is. Right? I mean, Clemson's a program that is traveling. They're going to Texas A&M this year.
Yeah.
They're willing to travel and play these home games. It's not like it's far from Clemson and Athens. It's right down the road. So listen, as a guy who's sitting over here as an Alabama fan in the SEC West, I'm all about it, man. You guys take on each other home and home to get that. That's good viewing and something that I think a lot of SEC fans will love.
But this is not just potentially a Georgia Clemson thing. I mean, we've seen Nick Saban change. I don't want to say change his tune, but certainly maybe change his philosophy. You get the Notre Dame Alabama series coming up in about 10 years.
10 years.
But still, I mean, it takes you have to schedule 10 years just to get the game.
I know, it's crazy.
So I think if you want to look 10 years in the future, it's these kind of home and homes. They're going to dot everybody's schedule. Bo Molinari's in here talking about the fact that he's excited about Clemson coming to Kyle Field this year. You should be. It's going to be a great game. Right. I'm excited about that already. But these deals where, okay, it's great to come to Mercedes-Benz or go to Dallas and play a game or go to Orlando, but these home and homes are going to be what it looks like in the future. And there's nothing gained by doing a home and home with a 5-7 team like Georgia Tech. You need to be playing someone that's going to get you some national attention.
And it's a great. We talked about advertising the NFL draft and Nick Saban showing up in New York and Kirby Smart showing up in New York. That's what I mean. Think about that. Now you're looking at a good opportunity. Maybe College Game Day comes down to College Station. You get these home and homes. Clemson's heading into town, and then all of a sudden it becomes a much bigger deal. Then all of a sudden all the focus in the country is on your team and what can they do on that big stage. Then maybe A&M puts up a good fight. Maybe A&M has a chance to win the game and go out there and do that. That is such good advertising for your program on such a national stage.
Jake Farmer says, BA, this rivalry may make you drink more if Dabo hangs 40 on you. Listen, I got great respect for Clemson. That's a good program.
Dabo can hang 40 on a lot of people. I got news for you. There's not many programs out there Dabo can't hang 40 on.
This is one of those games. They're only like hour and a half apart. To me, it's just sort of begging to be played. All right, so we got item number 7 here, SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So Tennessee, we briefly mentioned this yesterday, taking a page out of the playbook of Texas A&M, who did this not too long ago with Tim Brewster. New coaching staff, but coaches that are not new to the SEC or big-time college football. So how about brag about some of the NFL players that have been coached up by the staff at previous location? Tennessee does this on Twitter, saying there are 90 total NFL players that have been coached by Jeremy Pruitt's staff here. The problem is most of those guys, really none of those guys, played at Tennessee. This got some criticism when A&M tried this. It gets some criticism when Tennessee tries it. Is this a good idea?
I don't think so. And I understand what they're doing. Listen, Jeremy Pruitt's never been a head coach before. I mean, the staff's never been in the position they're in. None of them have ever been at Tennessee. So I understand what you're doing. You're trying to put your best foot forward. You're trying to look at recruits and say, listen, this is what we can do with you. But in the end, I think a lot of these guys look and are coming from programs that you say, well, if those guys went there and they're going to the NFL, why am I not going there? You know, I think that's what Jeremy Pruitt has to be careful of. Tennessee has a lot to be proud of, though. I think that's where I stand on this. Tennessee has so much history to be proud of. If I'm not mistaken, Tennessee is the second winningest program in the SEC history. And so why not? Let's push that narrative. Let's talk about what Tennessee is. Let's talk about, Peyton Manning. Let's talk about Hall of Famers. Let's talk about Reggie White. I think you're missing it a little bit if you're Jeremy Pruitt and his staff to start pointing to other schools as to where you get your pride from.
Morgan Recton says it's a bad look for Tennessee to be trying to do this here. Somebody else who thought it was a bad look was the former Georgia offensive lineman John Theus, who shows up on this list because he was coached by the current Tennessee offensive line coach, Will Friend. I love his sort of deadpan response here. He says, can y'all take my name off this list, please? Like, there's not like a whole lot of like anger and vitriol. It's almost like a guy that sort of got wrapped up in a group text he doesn't want to be a part of. He's like, can I be off this list, please? Can I not be included? It's almost like he's applying for the federal do not call list. He's like, can I not be on this?
I can't tell you how many times I've sent that exact text message to a group text message like, hey, can somebody take me out of here? Like, I don't know how to do this right now. But you're so right. I mean, there's no emojis going on there, and I think that's how most people on that list probably feel, just not all of them are aware of it.
To avoid being a hypocrite, what I said about Texas A&M when they did this was there's no such thing as bad publicity. In a roundabout way for Tennessee, there's also no such thing as bad publicity either, but I also feel the need to renew what I said yesterday about Tennessee of when are we going to see Tennessee selling something that somebody else hasn't already tried? This thing about, hey, look at who our coach is coaching the NFL. A&M already tried that. The weight room video yesterday. South Carolina tried that. What is Tennessee selling that somebody else hasn't been selling for longer?
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be a talking point for the next few months and into all the way up to signing day, really, is what can the selling point be? And I think it's going to be up to Jeremy Pruitt to start landing those recruits so that you can get an inside look. Hey, like, why'd you choose Tennessee? And I think it comes down to me in a lot of different ways talking about the talent pool in state, because that's just it's not as deep in Tennessee as it is in places like Florida and Georgia right now. So you have to find a way to lure those guys away from Georgia, out of Atlanta or South Florida, out of Florida and Florida State's backyard. That they have to find some other selling point.
On YouTube, Tyler Mann says there's nothing worse than the group text. I think for some of the guys on this list, that sort of ends up feeling like a bit of a group text. Let's go to item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and I absolutely love this from Will Muschamp. And I feel like Muschamp is kind of in the category of a lot of these SEC schools that, they did their spring games early in the spring, and almost all of them were impacted by bad weather.
Yeah.
But they almost all had to sort of like name their attendance figure before everybody else started naming theirs. And Muschamp had a great response in terms of like, I guess it's only like 25,000 credited with being at Williams-Brice Stadium, or as they call it, Willie B, for the South Carolina spring game. He says, sure, it's nice to have great fan support. I thought we had a great turnout. I want to see who's counting on these spring game attendances, though. I'm watching some of these spring games. I'm watching the crowd, and then what they're putting out there is not exactly what I think it is. I think we got cheated on some of ours. I think we had more than 25. I think we had 50. Let's say we had 50. There's no doubt there's some fudging of the numbers. That's Will Muschamp via the Big Spur, which is a site that covers South Carolina here. That's obviously a reference to, I think anyway, Tennessee, who was claiming $65,000 for their spring game, when you said there's no way that's true.
No, it was a couple of them. To me, I mean, and I don't think Alabama's immune to that either. I guessed that Alabama's, and they get, their figure was about 10,000 more than I guessed. And LSU was the same way, and I was looking at LSU and I thought, they probably 10, 15 there, come out with 22. I'm like, maybe, but it's so interesting because I think all these numbers get pushed in the wrong direction.
I wanted to find the audio. I thought I had it, and I just couldn't find it, of Dan Mullen turning to Pat Dooley, the longtime Florida writer, after their spring game and saying they claimed $50,000. He said, and we didn't fudge the numbers either. So clearly this idea is out there. It's sort of like tanking in the NBA. It's sort of a poor secret. Everybody knows it goes on. In terms of exaggerating the numbers, this is something that's sort of gone on for a while because there are no turnstiles being spun. You can't tell who's coming in because most of these places have open gates. You're not counting the people walking through. It's literally just sort of an eyeball of,
That's such a good point.
50,000.
Because, these schools will come out and say 24,738 today. It's like, where did you even get that? Like, how did you even come up with a number that exact?
Bull Molinari's A&M fan says, hell, we had 25,000 people turn out the midnight Yale practice the night before the maroon and white game. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these schools get great support. A&M's certainly an example of that. I think Muschamp's point here is, had we done our spring game this past weekend, we would have just named some big total too, because if that's the way we're going to play, then we can just make up some number also.
Yeah, it's like 7 of the 14 teams need to put like an asterisk and be like, hey, snowy weather, below zero, type of thing going on.
Honestly, I feel sorry for Arkansas. I feel sorry for South Carolina. I feel sorry for Auburn. I'm not really quite sure, how big the attendance would have been at these plays otherwise. I mean, we can debate how big of a draw spring games are right now. But all those schools, for the first 2 weekends, everybody was wrecked by bad weather.
Yeah, we didn't even get to see the outcome of the whole Little Rock storyline in terms of the Arkansas spring game because nobody was there. It was so cold.
I think we know what that is.
I know, but you wanted to at least give them a chance to really show up and show out there in Little Rock, and I think their announced attendance was like 5,000.
Speaking of Little Rock, Robert Hall checking in. He says, WPS Razorbacks, go Hogs, go. Robert, thanks for checking in on the show today. Kyle Crawford also says, this is kind of interesting, that they passed out the passes to sections at G-Day. That's a way to know, but I'm sure it's not 100% accurate. Well, the G-Day thing when it comes to Georgia, I mean, you can look at the stands. I mean, listen, I hate to be, a homer here, but I mean, the stands were full. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's a little easier to get a gauge of the Georgia crowd when you except for the one end zone that was sort of closed off for construction. I mean, you didn't see a lot of, you didn't see visually empty seats.
I agree with you, but to me, there is a difference between a game day, selling tickets full, and a spring game full.
That's true.
You get the spring game.
So true.
You got people sprawled out, right? I mean, but you get in that ticket, your ticket's for this much of the bleachers, right?
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah.
It's a lot tougher to come.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's it looks full, but in a game day situation, you can squeeze in 10 more people on those
Somebody's
rows.
got their backpack right here and their cooler right here, and it does. But I'm with you. There was a ton of people at the G-Day game.
That is very true. All right, let's do item number 9. Let's get back to something kind of semi-serious here for a moment. And actually, I hate to say feel sorry for a guy that's going to have a great college football career, but I feel sorry a little bit for 4-star offensive lineman Wanye Morris, who seems like, and he's going to be a part of this big announcement on May 1st. And by the way, we have live SEC country coverage of this coming up on Tuesday. You don't know this yet, but we're going to ask you to work.
Somebody informed me. They were like, yeah, we should have probably asked you by now, but I'm on board. I will be there.
So we're going to do live coverage May 1st of a lot of elite recruits, all from the same school in the Atlanta area, choosing their future college home. It's SEC guys across the board here. Wanye Morris, one of the offensive linemen, he's going to choose between Auburn or Tennessee, and it sounds like Morris is about ready for his choice to sort of come and go here. Here's the tweet that he sort of put out recently. He says, I can't wait to put this recruiting stuff to rest. May 1st, hurry up. Gives you what I think of as a frowning emoji, a little bit of a head slap emoji there. They always like when I start describing emojis. The young, hip, cool folks that work on our show always think that kind of stuff is funny.
I gotta go off on a side note here while you're talking about that. You know what the first thing that popped in my head when Alabama announced Notre Dame in 10 years?
What's that?
I was like, I'm going to be as old as BA. I cannot believe I'm going to be BA's age when Alabama plays Notre Dame.
Some people I'm actually young. There is a whole population out there that looks at me as sort of a young kid, but nonetheless, I don't know emoji language all that well, and one day you'll be just as old as I am now. Yep. Yes, as you said.
I will.
But anyway, back to the subject at hand here. I'm actually going to take Wanye Morris at his word here. Some of these guys like cultivating attention. It seems like Morris is sort of pushing back against that attention, and you can read, both sides of this. Ben Wolk does a good job covering this from the Auburn perspective. Blake Morgan does a good job covering this from the Tennessee perspective, both at SEC country. There's a lot of pulling and pushing here on Morris, and it sounds like he's pretty conflicted about his decision.
Yeah, it's tough. And recruits come. I mean, there's a couple of recruits every year that you feel like this because at some point you got to make a decision. And if I'm Wanye Morris, I mean, I know obviously the announcements are coming up, but it's like, man, at what point do you just say I don't know? I think there's a lot of people out there that like the attention, that like getting on campus and being fed and being shown the ropes and being treated like royalty at all these games all year. There's some people that don't. There's some people that are actually torn, and there's some people that you really can take them at their word, and that's what it sounds like Wanye Morris is. It sounds like that he really has good relationships at both places, and he knows whoever he picks, the other team's going to be extremely let down.
I mean, I think that this also, and maybe there's still a slight point spread favorite. What we said about LSU earlier, boy, you really need to win with Ishmael Sopsher. if you're Tennessee, now listen, Auburn needs Wanya Morris too, and they're trying to build a little bit of a thing. And this school there, it's Grayson High School in the suburban Atlanta area. This is a much more important recruiting battle for Tennessee than it is for Auburn.
I agree.
Auburn signed 16 four-star prospects a year ago. They are in business with plenty of four-star guys. When it comes to this four-star player for Tennessee, Jeremy Pruitt just needs some sort of trophy to put on the wall here. This is a big deal for Tennessee.
But I think it's big what you just said about the region of we're talking about right outside of Atlanta, right? Because at no point do I expect that Jeremy Pruitt's just going to pull everybody from Atlanta and get them up to Tennessee and they're all going to wave bye to Kirby Smart. I don't think it's going to happen. But you want to open up a little bit of a pipeline to where you can get the guys that Kirby Smart's like, I'm not sure, to where you can get that second-tier guys out of Roswell, like we just talked about, out of Lawrenceville, out of Alpharetta. Start to get some of those guys up to Tennessee because the in-state talent isn't as good up there as it is down here, and he's got to start developing those relationships.
In 1998, Tennessee won the national championship. It did so with Deion Grant from Augusta, Georgia, Cozy Coleman from the state of Georgia, Jamal Lewis was from Atlanta, Georgia. That was 3 significant contributors to a national championship team, all came from Georgia. Tennessee cannot be good without Georgia recruits.
Yeah, Jamal Lewis actually went to prison in Pensacola, so I have a little connection with him as well.
Here I am trying to be nice. You got to take it to that end of the week here. You got to take it to that place.
I don't know. I couldn't help it.
You feel good about yourself now?
End of the week.
There you go. There you go. That's Mike Johnson. You can send your anger emails to him. Cliff Nelson says, who, by the way, Cliff lives, I guess in Texas now, but he says to call Grayson suburban to Atlanta is a stretch, BA. Grayson's way out there. It's like extended suburb, but it's in Gwinnett County. That's a suburban Atlanta county.
Yeah, it kind of goes hand in hand with like Kennesaw. Like if Kennesaw is suburban Atlanta or like Beaufort, I think you have to,
I mean, if you really want to go down a road here on this, as a Georgia fan, Grayson's only like 50 minutes from Athens. There's so many good Grayson players that did not go to Georgia. That used to drive me crazy for forever.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, who was it the guy? Is it A&M that got a commitment from Grayson last week?
Yeah, 4-star receiver. So. All right, let's do item number 10 here. Get back to the NFL draft for a moment. It is tonight, first round from Dallas. It is in Dallas tonight, right?
Yeah, it is in Dallas.
So a lot of SEC names expected to go in the first round. I'm going to put you on the spot here for a moment. I set the over-under total at 7.5. I just sort of pulled this out of thin air here. Do you think more than 7.5, fewer than 7.5 first-round picks for SEC players tonight?
I'm going under 7.5
Are you really?
for first-round SEC players, and it's tough because I think in my mind I think the SEC has 5 locks, but I think that right on the fringe there's like another like 15, right? And I've got a bunch of names right here. First of all, I think Mika Roquan, Taven Bryan out of Florida, I think Deron Payne and Rashaan Evans are all locks. And then at the end of it, I got Frank Radnow.
Yeah, get him in there.
Maybe Calvin Ridley.
How about Hayden Hurst, the South
Well, what I'm saying
end?
is that's my next tier. I think you could make an argument for Dante Jackson, Sonny Michel, Ronnie Harrison, Christian Kirk, Isaiah Wynn, Darius Geis, Hayden Hurst, DJ Shark, Arden Key. You could make an announcement for all those guys to get in there. But I'm still going under the 7.5 because it's so tough, and a lot of these times it comes down to some of these guys just slipping in that second day. And I think the SEC might set the record for amount of players in one round. I just think it'll be in the second round.
I'm going to go over on this because of some of the other names you just mentioned. A bunch of Alabama guys. We know Minka. We know Rashaan Evans. Georgia's going to have at least, I would say, 2 because Roquan's a lock. Isaiah Wynn, the offensive lineman, seems like a near lock. But give me Sonny Michel here. Give me Hurst, the tight end. Give me Ragnow from Arkansas. Give me the defensive tackle from Florida. Give me those guys kind of getting in there as well. I think you can get up to 8 here.
Let me ask you something. I don't even know if you've heard about this. Have you heard some of the Sonny Michel injury medical response type things? What do you make of that?
I think that's the biggest bunch of jive in the world.
I mean,
all this stuff is, exaggeration. Now, obviously, in the case of Michel, I'm probably biased, but I think just about a lot of, when you hear this stuff, day of the draft, things like that, to me, it's almost all subterfuge, which is probably a bigger word than I should be using. All, cloak and dagger stuff in these NFL teams. We watched Sonny Michel for the last 4 years. Did he look like he had a hurt knee?
No, didn't to me. That's why I thought it was so interesting. I don't know if it's, obviously it's not disclosed. I don't know if it's shoulders or knees or whatever it may be. But I thought that was an interesting little tidbit to come out today. Now, it's like I said, I'm saying under 7.5 on the first round, but I think by the end of the second round, you have the possibility of seeing 20 to 25 guys out of the SEC by the end of the second round. I really do. I think it's a loaded draft for the SEC.
Rick Keene also mentioning a guy that could have potentially been there was Antonio Callaway, the Florida receiver. He's certainly fallen hard time.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, like I tweeted this the other day, it's just hard to give a guy the benefit of the doubt after, something happens once. Okay, the guy messed up. He's turning his life around. And then you get the message out before the draft, this guy's really changed. it's just hard to continue giving a guy the benefit of the doubt when his name pops up in so many of these situations.
Travis Magby mentioning Duke Dawson, the Florida defensive back in the first round.
I've got Duke Dawson down as well. Carlton
As a first
Davis.
rounder?
No, I'm saying fringe guys, second round. Duke Dawson, Carlton Davis, Lorenzo Carter, Anthony Averett. I think all those guys are going to be battling to get right there in the second round.
Who we didn't mention was Carlton Davis, who had the issue going back to the Peach Bowl. Or maybe you did mention him. I mean, I wasn't listening.
No, I just said Carlton Davis, Duke Dawson.
So you said like 45 names. I can't keep up with them all.
Because that's what I'm saying. I think the second round out of the SEC, I think there could be 15 to 20. And maybe that's the SEC homer in me, but I really feel like that.
Also, one of those fringe names, I'm sure you said this one too. Bo Molinari mentions Christian Kirk, the wide
Christian
receiver.
Kirk, I absolutely
Although
said.
Christian Kirk, if you're not going to have kickoff returns in the NFL anymore, does Kirk still have any value?
Yeah, I mean, DJ Chark's the same way out of LSU. I feel the same way about him. So,
all right, let's do our champion of life. We always close the show the same way every day. We're actually closing the week now as well. And listen, y'all know I'm a fan. I do this show from the perspective as a fan, trying to be as honest as I can. As a fan, I cannot stand Baker Mayfield. He's one of the players that I have liked in college football less than any other in, I don't know, seemingly decades. But I think this is hilarious.
Yeah.
Let me show you the tweet from Mayfield, and this is probably for some sort of promotional deal here, where he's replicating a famous draft photo from Brett Favre from years ago when Favre got drafted by the Packers. Let me show you the Favre photo here first of what happened there in the past. There is Favre down there with the rolled up jean shorts, with sort of a classic look. And then above that, you see Baker Mayfield really creating the same picture. I don't know how this was done, how you make this happen. It's not exactly the same. You see a couple differences there. But this, the Favre picture is something I know very well. I don't know if other people know about it quite as well.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen it a million times. The fact that Mayfield recreates this for whatever reason he did, is it Pardon My Take that did this? Are they the ones that did this? That is hilarious, fascinating stuff.
I think it's awesome. I mean, listen, man crush on Brett Favre. Everything that guy ever did in the NFL. I mean, you talk about going straight out of Hattiesburg, being drafted to the Falcons right there, and end up being one of the most famous trades of all time, Falcons to the Packers.
And by the way, you have to be as old as me to know anything about rolled up jean shorts like that.
Yeah,
back in like late 80s. Now, I never did this because I don't, but that was definitely a thing that was done.
Did you see Brett Favre's response? He said, "Man, this picture is awesome. Make sure you send me my jean shorts back." So Brett Favre came out and tweeted that.
Good stuff. Cool. You're on your way to Talladega this weekend, right?
Talladega, baby. Going to Talladega.
Enjoy the race wherever y'all are. Enjoy yourself. Nice spring weekend. We'll be back on Monday. We'll see you then. In between now and then, check out the podcast and all the various podcast channels. Thanks y'all for watching on the different video stuff. Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all of that. Share the show if you don't mind. Let folks know we're talking about the SEC. Really fun week. Thanks for making it great for us. We'll see you Monday, 3 p.m. for another episode of SEC Country Live.